Hi, this is Jason from Etsanic. In this video, I'll take you through the initial steps on setting up a phone with CalyxOS. We'll discuss microG, Datura Firewall, VPNs, and app permissions, all in an effort for the average user to improve their privacy when using their smartphone. These are all linked to in the show notes in case you want to move ahead in the video to a particular chapter. I also have a summary chapter near the end of the video that serves to give you a rundown of the essential messages in this video. So what is CalyxOS? CalyxOS is a modified Android operating system free of data collection and spying apps and services. These are normally installed onto phones that you would buy from a cell provider, like Bell or T-Mobile. What that means is all Google apps and background services and bloatware like Facebook, Amazon, and fishy cell provider and phone manufacturer apps have been removed. You can install CalyxOS yourself on certain models of phones, or if you don't want to go through that learning curve, purchase them directly from Etsanic.com. I want to show you how easy these phones are to use and set up, and hopefully give you some information to decide if such a device is for you. So for the first part, let's do a screenshot tour showing the setup that you would go through exactly when you first boot a phone with a fresh installation of CalyxOS. You'll see that most steps are exactly the same as a phone that you would have purchased from a cell carrier, with a few important exceptions. So the first page here is you'll see a message each time you power on your phone. It's a standard security notification indicating that the original stock Android operating system that came with the phone has been replaced with something else. So in this case, it's CalyxOS. On page 2 is the initial setup screen. So it's going to take a minute or two to boot up and set up the phone for the first time. So in subsequent restarts of the phone, this time will be reduced significantly and you won't have to go through the setup process described in this particular chapter of the video. On page 3, you can set the date and time. So here you can set the language by scrolling through the options and then set the date and time from the drop-down menu options on this screen here. Page 4 gives you options to connect to Wi-Fi. So here it lists available Wi-Fi networks within the range of the phone. So I've redacted those here. So once you select your Wi-Fi network, you can enter its password. On page 5, it asks you if you want to use cell data to set up the phone. So for this, I select no, because I always set up my phone connected to Wi-Fi. So it's important to note that later on in the setup process, Calyx gives the option to download additional apps like secondary browsers and messaging apps that might take a significant amount of data. So you can always download these apps at a later time when connected to Wi-Fi or via the F-Droid app store that's installed on the phone. So I'll talk more about F-Droid later in the video. Page 6 is location services. So you can toggle these on or off. To be safe, I always deny it here and then set individual location permissions for each app in the Android settings once the phone is set up. So I'll go into location settings later on in the permissions chapter of this video. Page 7 is your fingerprint, PIN, pattern, or password setup. Here you can set a security check so that people can't access your phone. It's a standard fingerprint or passcode options is found on pretty much all Android phones. For the purpose of this video, I'm using a Pixel 3a XL, which has a fingerprint reader. But other phones like the Pixel 4 and onwards have replaced the fingerprint reader with face recognition. So if you have a phone like that, you'll only be able to set a PIN, pattern, or password to secure your phone. Page 8 is your microG setup. So microG is a free and open source software implementation of some of the most used components of Google Play Services. So Google Play Services is the built-in coding installed on Android operating systems found on phones that you would purchase from a cell provider. It provides a background service that's linked to Google that allows many apps to function properly. microG replaces some of these Google Play services and allows many apps that require it to work without needing to install Play Services itself. But unlike Google Play Services, microG itself does not track user activity on the device, but depending on how it's set up, some data can be shared with Google. microG eliminates or minimizes information sent to Google and other third parties from your device. And you can selectively enable and disable specific features, so I'll go over that later on in the microG chapter of this video. Your phone doesn't need microG or Google Play services to work. It's up to you whether you want to enable it or not. If it's not enabled, it just means that some apps might not work on your phone properly. So I can provide some guidance for the average phone user here. So first, let's say you are taking steps to ensure a higher level of privacy on your phone, especially when you're comparing it to a phone purchased from a cell provider. Plus, you want a selection of popular apps to work on your phone, so like ride-sharing services or even some apps like Google Maps. Then I would pick to install microG. Well, microG is the most pragmatic balance really between privacy and functionality. So second, let's say you want the highest level of privacy on your phone. So while you're willing to compromise a bit on some of the popular apps that you use, and then replacing them with alternative privacy-focused apps, then I would disable microG. In the future, after testing things out, you can always reset your phone and disable or enable microG when you set up the phone for a second time. But of course, this is going to take a bit more work. On these pages, here you are given the option to install from a list of free and open source apps. So it's important to note that the F-Droid app will automatically be installed on your phone with CalyxOS. So F-Droid is an app market that offers apps that are open source and don't ask for questionable permissions, nor do they contain trackers or collect personal data. The F-Droid app will allow you to easily install these apps at a later time, with the exception of a few, including Signal, which you would need to install from the Signal website or use the Aurora Store app. So I'll show you how to install Aurora Store later on in the video. I also have an additional video linked to in the show notes that provides a full tutorial on how to use F-Droid and Aurora Store. So page 11 gives you the option to restore from a backup. So to use this feature, you need to have a backup file existing on your phone, or use a USB stick connected with a USB on the go adapter. I won't go over how to restore a backup as it's really beyond the scope of this video. The last page here is your final setup screen. So this is the final setup screen before the phone fully boots up to the home screen. So once this whole setup process is complete, you won't have to do it again, and the phone will boot up to the home screen each time. Okay, now we're on the home screen and the phone has fully booted up with CalyxOS. The F-Droid app is installed on the phone, and just like a stock Android operating system, you can move and change the icons that appear on your screen, and you can make changes to the wallpaper. You can also install things like custom launchers like Lawnchair or Nova Launcher that allow you to customize your phone to a much greater degree. So in the app drawer, you can see a minimal list of stock apps included with CalyxOS. So these include things like a calendar, clock, a file browser, gallery, internet browser, music app, SMS texting app, and the Android settings icon. So you can install additional apps via F-Droid and the Aurora Store. So to install Aurora Store, just go to F-Droid, search for Aurora Store and install it. Aurora Store is an app market that allows you to privately install apps found on the Google Play Store. Welcome to the chapter on microG. So let's take a look at it and discuss the various settings and services, how they're used, and the potential implications on data sharing and privacy. The first thing to do after opening microG is to select Self-Check. Everything in the Self-Check should be checked off, indicating microG is set up properly on your phone. So under Account, you can log into an existing personal Google account. So this is only really needed for specific uses. Otherwise, I would really avoid signing in, as more information about your activities on the phone will be shared with Google. The main reason you would want to sign in is say you decide to install Google Maps on your phone via the Aurora Store. So in order to access any personal maps or locations you created and saved to that personal Google account, then you'd need to sign in so that you can access those maps and locations. So to use the Google Map by itself, you don't need to sign into an account. Again, only if you want to access those saved maps or locations. Google Device Registration will register your device to Google Services and creates a unique anonymous device identifier. So microG strips all identifying pieces from the registration data. So the exception to this would be if you log into your Google account from the previous section. Then microG would share that login information with Google. If you want cloud messaging to work, you need to keep this enabled. So let's talk about cloud messaging. So apps can use this to receive push or near instant notifications. Say you have a Messenger app installed. It might rely on cloud messaging to notify it when you receive new messages. So having a single channel to do this is more power efficient than when having each app maintain its own always open connection. In microG, cloud messaging notifications are sent through Google servers. If the user signs into a Google account, as I mentioned previously, there will be a Google login from the user's IP, but with no identifying data. So what's an IP? So an IP address is a numerical label assigned to each device connected to a computer and internet network. An IP address serves two main functions. So the first is network identification, and the second is location identification. With a smartphone, your IP address will change because it depends on the networks it connects to. So as you're moving around, you're connecting to various Wi-Fi networks or cell phone towers with different IP addresses. So for apps who use cloud messaging, notifications are passing through Google servers, though it's anonymous access. However, the content of the push messages could contain some identifying data. You can disable this in the microG settings by turning off Google device registration and cloud messaging. But if you do this though, then you won't receive those push notifications. But keep in mind, many messaging apps like Signal or SMS texting apps don't need cloud messaging enabled in order to receive these notifications. Okay, Google Safety Net. So Google defines Safety Net as a device certification service that checks if the phone's operating system is properly secured. Some applications require Safety Net because they want to check if the device is being modified outside certain strict parameters. So these are typically apps used for banking or services that provide some sort of an ability to exchange money, say like eBay, Amazon, or a PayPal app. If Safety Net's not enabled, then these apps just won't work. But even then, there might be issues as some apps have some proprietary code in them that interacts with microG and just prevents them from working. For me, I don't have anything on my phone where I can purchase items or interact with my bank account, so it's not an issue. But if you do or want that capability, it's something to be aware of. If you enable Safety Net, then again, some data might be leaked to Google. Okay, so location modules are used to provide the approximate location of your phone without needing to turn on the power-hungry but really more accurate GPS sensor. On phones provided by your cell company, so Google will provide the location module. So what that means is Google can read Wi-Fi modems and cell towers you're connected to, and then compares them to a proprietary database of these devices and their locations. So through an algorithm, Google can determine your location and then send that back to you. So it's not only that, but Google also collects data regarding what new network devices you are connected to, so say a new Wi-Fi modem or a new cell tower, and their locations, so they can continuously build on this database. So this is an obvious privacy concern. microG instead allows you to bypass this Google system entirely and enable one or more alternate location modules. So you can choose modules that are entirely self-contained on your phone, or you can choose providers like Mozilla or Apple that much better protect your privacy. CalyxOS provides backends out of the box that you can enable. So I've linked to a list of additional backends in the show notes, and you can install them via F-Droid. Once you've done that, you'll have to come back to the location module setting in microG to fully enable them. So the last one here is exposure notifications. So this is a new component of Google Play Services and microG that can help with COVID contact tracing. Okay, so we're on the chapter for Datura Firewall. So CalyxOS includes a firewall built into the operating system. A firewall allows you to limit or completely block access from a device to the internet. So in the case of Datura Firewall, it allows you to control access on your phone by an app-by-app or service-by-service basis through a really easy-to-use interface. By disabling an app's internet access, you can block it from sending you ads or sharing identifiable personal data via the app's coding or built-in trackers. I have a link in the show notes to a website called Exodus Privacy that explains app trackers and how they collect and share data about your activities on your phone to third parties. The downside to disabling access for an app, if it needs internet to function, for example like an email or messaging app, then it won't work as intended. Enabling access will allow them to work properly, but then they could be sending tracking data to third parties. That's why it's important to choose apps that don't contain these trackers. Again, more information can be found on the Exodus privacy website. They have a comprehensive list of apps and provide information on the number and types of permissions and trackers for each app. On the Etsanic website, under the Resources section, there is a regularly updated list of recommended privacy-focused app replacements that you can check out as well. So back to Datura Firewall. So once you open it, you are provided with a list of each app and service installed on your phone. When you select an app, you can modify that app's access based on 4 categories. So background network access, Wi-Fi access, mobile data access, and VPN access. So let's look at each one next. So what background data means, it means that an app can be using data even when you're not actively using the app, and sometimes this is called background syncing. Background data can keep your apps updated with the latest message, email, or social media notification. And most apps found on the Google Play Store also send tracker data in the background as well. So my suggestion is to limit background network access for all installed apps unless that app's purpose is to receive some sort of a notification, like a messaging app or an email. As mentioned in the microG chapter, some apps will receive their notifications from the microG service. So those apps won't be affected unless you block background access for microG. So some apps won't even use microG for push notifications. So if you block background access for those, then you won't receive those notifications. The next 2 are allow Wi-Fi data and allow mobile data. So these 2 settings allow you to block access when connected to Wi-Fi, like in your home or a coffee shop, or cell data when you're outdoors or in a vehicle. On to allow VPN data. A VPN or virtual private network encrypts your internet traffic and really makes it more difficult for a third party to track your online activities and possibly steal your data. The encryption takes place in real time and occurs between your device and the VPN service. So to use a VPN, you will need to have at least one VPN service installed on your phone and then have it enabled. In Datura Firewall, when going through the list of apps, don't try to block everything you see, because some components, including the stock apps, might need internet access to function properly. Personally, I find a lot of apps request internet access, but in reality, they don't need it. They seem to function as intended without it. If you find an app won't work properly, you can always quickly re-enable access in the Datura Firewall. Again, there are apps that obviously need access to work, like most messaging apps, offline and online mapping apps, music streaming and video apps, and email. So it's a bit of trial and error, but it's not hard to get things working the way you want. So let's talk about VPN services next. Welcome to the chapter on VPNs. So there's a lot of conflicting information online about what makes a good VPN. Some VPNs are free while others are paid. Some log their traffic, some don't, and some are outright sketchy and fly-by-night companies. I have an article in the show notes that further discusses VPNs, so why they're important and what to look for in a service provider. There are a number of free VPNs like Calyx, RiseUp, and Proton that you can download from F-Droid. So these are very easy to set up, and for most users, they're more than suitable. For myself, I always use a VPN when connected to public Wi-Fi, like in a coffee shop or at an airport. In these circumstances, if you don't use a VPN, then your internet traffic, including things like emails or even sometimes passwords, won't be encrypted. So they could be intercepted and then read by the person or organization who owns that particular Wi-Fi network. Okay, let's talk about DNS. So another way to improve privacy on your phone is to set up an alternate DNS service. DNS is also known as Domain Name System, so it's essentially the phone book of the internet. A DNS service converts a human-friendly host name, like @sanic.com, into a computer-friendly IP address, which are a series of numbers like 192.168.1.1. When a user wants to load a web page, a translation has to occur between the host name that's typed into the browser and the machine-friendly IP address. And this is what the DNS service provides. An IP address is given to each device connected to the internet, so they are used to find other devices connected to the internet. Think of it as how a street address is really used to find a particular home. So most computers and phones default to having their internet or cell provider respectively provide DNS services. This means they'll know exactly which websites you visited. So some jurisdictions allow these companies to actually sell their customers' browsing data for financial gain. And in some cases, government organizations can request this data and then use it to implicate individuals depending on the websites that they visit. So that's where you might want to set up an alternative and private DNS service on your phone. In CalyxOS, you can connect to an alternative DNS services by going to Settings, Network and Internet, and Private DNS. Cloudflare is provided as an option because it has stated never to track its users or sell advertising based on their viewing habits. So there are other DNS services linked to in the show notes that provide additional options like encryption, ad blocking, and preventing access to malicious websites or websites that aren't appropriate for children. So I have a link in the show notes for some of these alternative DNS services. If you're interested in one, please test it. I've used some of these services and they've actually slowed down web pages from loading, while others have actually sped that process up. It's really going to depend on the service you choose and your location as to which one works best for you. So welcome to the chapter on app permissions. So there are a few ways to access app permissions, but the one I use is to go to Settings, and then Apps and Notifications, and then click on See All Apps. So here you are provided with a list of all the apps installed on the phone. Next, go through each app to determine its requested permissions. And then ask yourself if that permission seems valid for the purpose and functioning of the app, and then if you feel comfortable granting that type of access. So for example, an audio recording app will need access to the microphone and files and folders in order to save recordings. A messaging app might need access to the microphone for audio chats and then the camera to take pictures so that you can attach them to the message. I have a podcast app on my phone that requires access to the sensors because the app allows you to shake the phone to reset the sleep timer. These might be valid depending on how you use the app. So if I don't take pictures through my messaging app, then I could deny access to the camera. So on the other hand, a weather app in all likelihood shouldn't be asking you for your microphone and camera access. When you select an app, you can see what permissions are currently allowed and which are denied. So for the Chromium web browser, I don't want to give it access to my camera, contacts, location, or microphone. So I can just select each permission and then decide if I want the phone to ask me each time to grant that permission or just outright deny it. For files and folders, I'll keep that permission enabled because I use browsers to download files onto my phone. So after testing, if the app isn't functioning the way you want, you can always grant the permission to see if that helps. So if you're new to this, a lot of information might have been thrown at you in this video. So I want to summarize things here, so let's see if that helps. So number one, CalyxOS is an Android operating system that removes all apps and services that big tech companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon install on phones purchased from a cell provider. Number two, CalyxOS eliminates or significantly reduces the amount of identifiable information sent, largely without your knowledge, to these companies and other third parties. 3. The type and amount of information sent will largely depend on the apps you install on the phone, the settings you use in microG, and the network and app permissions you grant. 4. CalyxOS has the option to install microG. This is a service that replicates some of the core functions of Google Play services without collecting and sharing nearly as much identifiable information as Google Play services does. Many popular apps require Google Play services to function, so microG also allows many popular apps to function without having to give up so much privacy. 5. CalyxOS has a built-in firewall that can limit or completely block an app's access to the internet, including the type of data sharing mentioned previously. 6. Installing a VPN and enabling private DNS settings in CalyxOS can also greatly increase your privacy when using your smartphone. And 7. Finally, a phone with CalyxOS meets its full potential when paired with the concept of digital minimalism. Here you can decide on a core set of functions for your phone and then completely customize it so that it meets those functions. So that concludes our tutorial. Thanks for taking the time out of your day in order to watch it. I really hope you found it useful. It's important to mention that a phone with CalyxOS won't make you completely anonymous. Your cell provider can always track your location, whether you use anything from a smartphone to a flip phone. That's because these devices must connect to cell towers in order to receive calls. If 100% privacy is your goal, then frankly it's best not to use a mobile phone of any kind. But by purchasing or setting up a phone with CalyxOS, and by taking the steps listed in this tutorial, you will greatly increase your security and privacy online, especially from data collection and spying by big tech companies and other third parties. On the Atsanic website, under the Resources section, we have an easy-to-follow, point-by-point list on how you can set up a phone with CalyxOS and make the best use of its privacy features. Also included is how you can use the Exodus Privacy website to make smart app choices and ensure you install those that respect your privacy. The list on the website and this tutorial supplement each other to a great degree. Atsanic also offers a selection of smartphones for sale with a privacy-respecting CalyxOS or GrapheneOS installed. Technology is intrinsically neither good or bad. The key is using it to support your goals and values, rather than letting it use you. If you have any questions or constructive comments, please post those below. Thanks for watching.